Um, thank you, Ilse. Yeah, we will be recording this and we'll be sharing this out with everyone post-meeting, but just to provide a very brief introduction, this is our second kind of broader observer level meeting for our equitable mobility effort. So this is kind of a chance for us to fill you in and hear your thoughts and feedback on this project that we, Prospect Silicon Valley, and then Berkeley Law's Center for the Law, Energy and Environment are working on to explore some innovative financing and investment strategies for EV infrastructure and electrified mobility in underserved communities. So maybe we can do a little round of intros. I'm Carolyn Wiseman, Senior Project Associate with Prospect Silicon Valley, and I'll pass it to Ilse.
And I'm Elsa Villacorta. I'm a project manager with ProspectSV.
Hi, Ted Lamb, a Senior Research Fellow with the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment at UC Berkeley. Ilse, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide so we can show that agenda and get things moving. And then I think our last intro here would be Malcolm from our team. Malcolm, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, I'm Malcolm, also from CLEE. I'm a research fellow.
Awesome. Yeah, so just to briefly go over the agenda, we're going to give a brief update on our equitable mobility initiative. We'll hear from Paul Francis from KIGT, who is a local charging provider, and then go into some of the key financing and investment strategies that we've been crafting with our advisory group throughout this process. And then you'll hear from Ilse and our team about particularly on mobility hubs. And then we'll have a brief presentation from Dan Adler and Ted on the Climate Financing RFI from IBank. And then we'll have plenty of time for a group discussion. Along the way, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We can also take some breaks throughout to address those questions. And I think I will kick it over. Oh, and then a brief overview. These are just a list of our advisors that we've been working with throughout this effort. And so this is a range of experts from the mobility, equity, and financing space that have been helping us craft these innovative strategies.
And we thank them for their participation in our efforts, as well as all of you for joining us today.
Yes.
I think if we can go to the next slide. So yes, I will give just a quick overview of where we've come, where we're coming from, where we've gotten to date, and what we're looking at for the next few months as we move this initiative from the research and investigation phase to what we hope is the action phase. So as a group and with our advisors and with a group of leading outside experts, we've covered and sort of refined our on a range of topics. Just very briefly to sort of show you where the direction has gone. We've defined what for our group EV and mobility equity mean, focusing both on the business case and vehicle access for a diverse range of communities, and the importance and primacy of community-led decision-making on investment and on mobility types and locations. We've investigated a range of city-level approaches, ranging from the comprehensive ZEV action plan approach to
so
more targeted.
One copier is going to the building department.
Diane, if you wouldn't mind muting your mic, that'd be great. Thank you. From all the way to very targeted curbside permitting and car share and utility pole and streetlight pilot program approaches, which have been used to expand access in communities where EV charging and mobility, e-mobility access are typically lower. And we're investigating those and how to get funding for them. We've met with a range of leaders in innovative public funding programs, including a couple of leading programs here in California, like the Clean Mobility Options in Communities and Charge programs. And from those programs, we've learned about the importance of comprehensive technical assistance, the challenges of directly engaging with local governments in mobility investment, and the importance of having funding for innovative transportation services like car share, shuttles, et cetera, that truly enhance mobility and aren't just providing exclusively access for the individually owned motor vehicle. In that context, we've also talked a lot about mobility hubs and how they can really serve a range of needs, including serving the financing challenge and the infrastructure and mobility challenge at the same time. And we'll talk a little bit about those later. And soon we'll be moving into some innovative private investment models, including both a curbside charging approach that utilizes building power supply to minimize involvement of the utility and of the city approval process to speed approval, especially in underserved communities. And a model where cities, private financial institutions, transportation network companies, and others can integrate all of their sort of financial heft behind fleet charging and utilization support to ensure that the business case is clear for the charging company from day one, and the profit sort of integrates over time. So we'll talk a little bit about that down the road as well. So that's just a bit of an overview of where we are. Ilse, if you go to the next slide, just going a little bit deeper on how we are defining equity in the context of mobility and EVs. The first sort of core tenet here is that in California and across all the states that are driving this EV transition via regulation in particular, this is a state-led technology transition. And that is really a wonderful thing from a policy perspective, but it raises the risk that communities will be left behind if the policies are not in place to support them. So that is where we are centering the equity question, which is making sure that nobody's mobility is reduced by this effort to electrify transportation. There are many ways to define equity. They're very locally specific, but perhaps first among them is the extent to which mobility is directly linked to economic opportunity. And in that context, strategies to increase access to EVs, strategies to shift mobility to electrified and zero-emission modes must increase access to economic opportunity for those who need it. And that is a clear link in this country and around the world, and it needs to be kept sort of foremost as we investigate models to advance infrastructure investment. And then finally, we've developed a sort of a set of group goals, which is really to connect local governments and project partners on proposals that meet the unique business case of these kinds of investments. So that's where we're focusing our attention. That's the sort of stage of the effort that we're moving into with our advisors and with you in our broader group to try to find coalitions that can make this all happen. Ilse, if you go to the next slide, I want to just home in on a question that has come up and that we're sort of trying to figure out as we move through this work, which is, what is the national charging network? What is the state charging network? More broadly, the mobility network that we're going to move toward, and how is it possible for this to be equitable? And I pulled this from an NREL study from last year, which identified the sort of big picture need for a charging network by 2030 nationwide. Really wonderful analysis in detail of sort of just the absolute numbers required. And they take this approach where the roots are a private charging network, and then what they call the trunk, and you can see a lot of the national investment is in a public fast charging network. And there's very little investment anticipated, 9% of total national investment, in a public charging network that is not fast charging. And this is no doubt a fairly accurate analysis, but as we look through it, we note that the public network is a fairly limited use case of sort of destination and interstate travel-based EV charging. All the work that we've done, all the research we've done, and the outreach we've done with you and others indicates that there is a real need for shared mobility, micro-mobility, community-based solutions that may require more than 9% of total national investment in EV and mobility charging. And this is where we think some of the innovation needs to happen. No doubt NREL's numbers are 100% accurate, but we think there's a bit of a blind spot in this space. And those are the kind of solutions that we're trying to identify and support. So I just want to sort of flag that as a no disagreement with their framing of the total national network. But if we want to really make sure that mobility solutions are equitable and serve community needs, there will need to be probably a few more branches than NREL and others at the national level are identifying. So that's kind of where we want to be thinking with all of you. So I think with that, we'll skip the charging funding need for now. It is unclear, but we will move on from that. I think from that, we will pass it over to Paul, one of our advisors, to talk about his company's approach.
You're
Paul,
muted,
muted.
Paul.
There we go. Thanks, Ted. That
Thank you, Paul.
usually happens when you're muted. ProspectSV, thank you. CLEE, thank you. Can I share screen a little bit just to do, a little presentation? I know I have 5 minutes. Want to tell you guys a story about why we do what we do, what we've come up with.
You should have screen share enabled.
There it is.
All right.
Can you see my screen? Great. Paul Francis, CEO, co-founder of KIGT. That's Keep It Green Tech, Keep It Green Transit, Keep It Green Team. I've been in the industry since 2009. Our company is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. And what you're seeing here is just some of the research and some of the work we've done with our partners, Loom Advising. We've conducted a white paper over the years, a little bit of our work when it talks about equity, some suggestions we have for cities and regulatory agencies. And it's not just based on, here's what we think. It's from actual work done over the years. We have a virtual map if you guys would like the link to see some of the studies we've done, some suggestions, recommendations we have, and communities that are typically underserved. Right. So here's the virtual map, something really cool we've conducted, expanding from some research we've done earlier in our days back at KIGT when we first began. And the story begins with me initially in 2009, looking at the idea of imagining a world, if you guys can go there with me, where every morning when we wake up, you have a full tank. When you leave work, you have a full tank. After happy hour at the grocery store, you still have a full tank. And when you get home at night, that car is able to provide the power for you and your family and friends, and it costs you under $10 to do all of that every single day. That's the dream and the vision when we started KIGT, when we say reshaping 100 years of human habit. And where we're at today is in the process of raising and investing the chance to create a nationwide network we call the Electric Vehicle Energy Network of over 10,000 gig stations. But it didn't just start with this big idea. It first started with understanding why bigger is better and how putting something like this in a disadvantaged community is beneficial to all communities. You're talking about over 4 megawatts of load at this site, supported by the California Energy Commission and Uber. It'll be in a disadvantaged community along the interstate. But we didn't just get here after 10 years. It came from originally our first projects. You're talking about from 2014 to 2018, we're wanting to do work in our community. I was a board member of Victory Baptist Church in South LA. And what we had was the idea of creating a revenue stream for the community because they own real estate in the parking lot. How can we put chargers in the ground? We did our first installs at universities. We worked with municipals and cities doing pilot projects from 2009 to 2015. So we said, how can we add value to the community? How can they add value to their constituents? We first understood there was a major problem when we worked with a group in Watts. They asked us to install 10 DC fast chargers. And we were told there was not enough power to facilitate that. And when you had the conversation with the utility, they said it's going to cost $250,000 that can be invested at the time. Those 10 chargers are still sitting in crates in Watts. So we figured, how about we scale the project down and only put 5 at Victory Baptist Church? Let's only put 5 in McCarty Memorial Church in South LA, near where my grandma used to live. Cool project for us. And Hollywood United Methodist Church. Let's put 18 there because they have a good business model, large parking lot, facilitates the Hollywood Bowl, and we can even fit 3 DC fast chargers there. What we learned was the investment was more cumbersome than the work anticipated. Before design and engineer plans went in, that took 18 months. We learned it went from $250,000 to over $500,000 investment for this project, over $100,000 for 5 chargers at the church projects each. So then we decided to do a study to see why this is the case. Fortunately, we had some good partners. We worked with UCLA several years ago to discover that there's an EV charging desert. The work we did with the Loom was more updated, and we came to discover this is a major issue when you talk about the future and where investments going for rideshare, for EVs, and for equitable opportunity for clean and affordable fueling. This map tells a story in itself. This is a map where all the substations are not in South LA, where you have a condensed area of a large population of car share drivers and people that live in multifamily. Here's another situation right there on Martin Luther King Boulevard, near Adams, near Dorsey High School, right about a mile from where the other map was in South LA. No substations. Where will the power, where is the investment coming from? This is the condensed area of multi-level affordable housing in the areas where substations are not. So what we did was decide to invest in communities where typically Black and Hispanics don't have access to charging. And they're 40% less access to charging. 60% of residents rent, and they don't have control over how you're going to install charging, where we're going to get the power from. Rideshare drivers, 66% are ethnic background who do Lyft. So in the meantime, as we're figuring this stuff out, doing research with San Marcos and UCLA, we're able to get this project in the ground. San Diego Convention Center, this project in the ground, University of Texas. Still working on the church project. Still hearing it's going to take 2 years to get a pole. We're able to get this university project in the ground. Still telling us, Paul, it might take 2.5 years for us to get you power lines for Victory Baptist Church. Oh, by the way, it's going to take another investment of your own to upgrade the transformer. But we're able to get this project done. We're thankful for all these opportunities with Edison and these other projects. We did this on time, under budget 2020 during pandemic. But it's crazy how we're unable to get the support for some of these community projects and the timelines faster when it comes to permitting and investment. Here was this project we delivered to Inglewood, affordable housing. They weren't able to get it situated because they were government funded. However, like the Watts project, there's no foresight because these are people doing their job of getting grants and their nonprofit organizations. They're not thinking about power and upgrades. There was not enough funding left to invest in the transformers for the money they received to put in chargers. This project was able to get done in Rancho Cucamonga, similar size scope, affluent neighborhood though. University of Laverne. So you see the disparity, and all this time, we're still looking to get this project finished in 2024. This project done in 2024 and Victory Baptist. So what we're saying is the investment that we have to do now is bigger is better, because now with the gig station, 4 megawatts of load, we have the attention of the utility. We are able to get the power we need faster than these other smaller projects. And what we're saying to the committee and to the group is, when you look about smaller community projects, don't think 5, 10, because it's not the investment for the utility that's worth it for them to put in the time and money. Bigger is better. Faith-based organizations have parking lots. I'm talking about 50 to 100 chargers at a time in a single project is worth the investment, not just for the property owner, but for the city, for extra capacity, and for the future. And by that, we can reshape 100 years of human habit. Thank you.
Paul, thank you very much for that presentation, and thank you for sharing your work with us. A lot of what you've just described, I think, has informed the work that we're trying to do. I would love to ask you some questions, but if you're able to stick around for the Q&A, we can actually just loop it in there, because I think there's some points that you raised that might link to the stuff that Dan is going to present on in just a minute on the IBank front, if that works for you. If we can, that's awesome. Maybe we can just quickly move on then, and in the interest of time, I will just breeze through the note on just the initial strategies that we've been considering. We've shared all these with you in a short draft white paper. It's sort of the summary of our initial efforts to date. And I wanted to just talk through a couple of them, although I think Paul hit on a lot of these points, and Ilse is going to hit on a lot of them in a second. We are trying to surface a mix of strategies, some actual true financing, some backdoor financing, ways to reduce costs to make infrastructure investment work. And there's a few that have really risen to the top that we're trying to refine into pilot proposal. I'll just describe a couple of those, and then we'll have a group discussion after that. One, of course, is mobility hubs. Ilse will present on that in a minute. No need for me to go into detail, but a concept we're all familiar with, and we are investigating it specifically from the perspective of how a mobility hub can use multiple types of infrastructure to bring in multiple types of investment. We're also investigating models where the city or the local government would be directly involved in a charging investment through a dedicated amount of fleet charging with a city electrified fleet, and potentially some what we're deeming utilization support, potentially some upfront payments to match the needed charging utilization that would bring a charging station or stations to revenue positivity. In the early years, when we know an investment in an underserved community may not have high utilization in the first couple of years, and then dial that down over time as the investment becomes more and more utilized and the investment makes sense from the private EVSE suppliers' perspective. And third, as Paul was mentioning, direct partnerships with transportation network companies, Uber and Lyft, in their driver communities. If there are areas where we know a high percentage of TNC drivers live and would like to charge in the middle of the day or overnight, this is where we should be locating investment of curbside and publicly accessible charging. These are fleets that will need to be electrified very quickly under California regulations. And there's no reason for that charging not to be charging that is accessible by the broader community. So those partnerships with a bit of mixed capital is something we're investigating as well. We will share this white paper again after this meeting and in the coming months. We'd love your feedback on it. But with that, I will pass it over to Ilse for a focused discussion on a mobility hub model that we've been looking at.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm here to talk about the Del Paso Heights Mobility Hub and how it came about, kind of some of the funding streams that were used, as well as some of the programs that are offered to the community. The Del Paso Mobility Hub is located in northern Sacramento. It was born from an original project by the Sacramento Air Quality Management District and Mutual Housing. They worked with some CARB funds from Clean Mobility to help bolster the residents' EV access in those sites. From that, it kind of grew into more community-based mobility hubs, ones that were not behind a housing gate, but were open to the community. And that's where this Del Paso Heights Mobility Hub came from. And so it began as a calibration and grew from there. Now you can see here, we have quite a few partners from Breathe California, the Air District, of course, Green Tech, SMUD, Zipcar, and the city of Sacramento. And so by sort of taking it low and slow, they were able to build out what the community needed and how they could provide it. I think it was also bolstered by regional planning that was locating ways of serving disadvantaged communities that have been chronically underserved. And so Mobility Hub really resonated with some of the planning that was going on. From here, originally it was, I think, just a car share program and just a couple of chargers. And then by partnering with Green Tech, which offers workforce development throughout Sacramento, this idea was born that it could be more than just offering a couple of chargers. There could be more services targeted to the community. And that's kind of how they moved forward. As they started to use up some of the remaining CARB funds that they had left over and some of the own incentives from the Air District, this Del Paso Heights was born. And they utilized a variety of partners. They started to run up into some funding issues. And so SMUD actually, they work with SMUD, which is the local utility, and SMUD helped install some needed electrical updates for the transformer and help with charger installs. Zipcar came in and donated a couple of their cars for the community to use. Additionally, the city of Sacramento, once this location was identified by the community, it had been identified as blighted, as underused, as close to a lot of different things, including the local high school, Grant Union. And after conversations, the city of Sacramento actually donated the land, which was a huge, huge impetus for actually establishing it. And so in working with Breathe California through community outreach, they realized there had a raft of programs that they could offer. Next slide. So they started off with a student ride hail program. They had it before. Green Tech had a partnership with the local transit agency, but buses, the transit network wasn't super expansive. Getting their students from one place to another was a very long and arduous process. And so in developing this hub, this idea of an electric shuttle that would move around students from training site to training site and from high school to training site. And then there was the Plan Share Go program where originally eight Toyota hydrogen fuel cell vehicles were donated. And the idea was that it would be run by the Mobility Hub where they would either have drivers or people could share rides. And that was the whole thing. You plan it and then you share the vehicle and you go places. And then community car share, which was something existing that the Air District had, was also brought here. And in the community car share, you are able to, to get a vehicle rented for a couple of hours at a reduced rate once you apply to be a member of this mobility hub. And so, you know, you can run your errands. Of course, you have to be licensed for that. So, you know, it really depends on the needs of the specific members of the community. There should be a program that they can take advantage of. They also started to incorporate microtransit because they were realizing EVs were having a little bit of a slow uptake. So they included microtransit as well, where they can book a Lyft concierge ride through the mobility hub to take them places. And then, of course, those EV charging stations are still there. Over time, these programs have evolved a little bit. They no longer have 8 hydrogen fuel cells. They now have 10 EVs, which Zipcar stepped up and really donated those. And they're able to use the EV charging stations here. And then that community rideshare has actually become a little bit more popular now that folks are a little bit more comfortable with EV rides. Additionally, as sort of establishing this hub, the Air District reached out to the community and also spoke about the EV incentives they were offering. And so there was an uptick in EV ownership in the community. And so this is how they were able to build this coalition to try to identify as many funding streams as possible to build it into one community hub. You know, recently, Twin Rivers also, which is in the community, also started to add some funds into the hub. Since after, you know, realizing who the hub was serving, there was quite a few Twin Rivers community being served. And so the hub is now working with the high school to provide some workforce development and also provide a little bit of funding to help keep this going. Something that I think really needs to be underlined is the way sort of Green Tech and the Air District and all the partners really think about this is it's a community asset. And so how can the community benefit and how can they leverage investment to keep serving the community? And as I kind of mentioned in my story, it's evolved. It started out as just a couple of organizations. It's become much larger, and now it tries to incorporate as much of the community as possible. And so those partnerships are really, really important. In this case, the city donating that land is what we would kind of call an innovative finance model, since that was really what made this program being able to take off, and also reduced, obviously, some headaches with finding the correct retail or the correct real estate. And so if you want to go to the next ones, I just have a couple of slides in terms of where it's located. So this was before anything was built. This is how it looked like. And like I said, the community itself was the one, after some outreach, they identified this site as being underutilized, as being blighted, and as wanting something different to be here. Next slide. Here you can see this is after. It is a couple of years old at this point. There's a lot more things on site now. And so there's a vehicle and there's some charging stations, and there are also now 10 vehicles. I believe there's another charger. And so it's been obviously fits and starts. And because they are very responsive to the community, there are obviously growing pains. But it has been able to provide the community with needed access to mobility in a variety of ways. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ilse. And I think we'll have some questions and discussion about the mobility hub model, especially as it potentially relates to what IBank is maybe going to be able to do. And so I think with that, we'll pass it over to Dan Adler from the California IBank. For a minute on your climate financing request information.
Thank you, Ted. Thanks, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Ted, can you get a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yeah, we got a bit of background noise.
Okay, apologies for that. I'm going to be quick here. So why don't we go to the next slide? The California IBank Infrastructure Bank is leading the state's engagement with a really important and novel aspect of the Inflation Reduction Act, where the Federal Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund out of US EPA. The intent of this program is to provide capital through a series of mechanisms to state and local lenders, green banks such as ours, and the state aligned, some local nonprofits, and a range of different community-oriented lenders to create a new catalytic function revolving loans for these priority technology sectors and a few others that were added to the mix specific to California's clean energy and climate objectives. So in getting ready for that, and we're expecting announcements in February, perhaps actually March, around the winners and the volumes of capital, and then grant agreements will fly back and forth, potentially with capital actually being available to us as early as July. To get ready for that, we put out an RFI for all market participants. This is not a request for proposals. It's just a request for basically thought partnership and to identify framework structures that we could build off of into the future. So as the text here suggests, these are the sectors of priority interest, being obviously key for California's goals. But why don't we go to the next slide, and I'll talk about a little more what we're actually seeking from market participants. So there are two things we're trying to do in this exercise. We want to be ready to deploy capital. We want to be able to deploy capital for priority technologies, but also for priority communities. And that inclusive of the Biden administration's Justice 40 goals and all of California's, frankly, even more robust and longer standing objectives around social equity and economic uplift. So to do that, we want to get ready with financial products. That's sort of track one for the RFI. What specifically is missing on the ground for project deployment? So developers, allies to developers, and capital providers, what sort of financial products should we be offering as soon as we can? That's not going to be everything. You know, there's a lot of different needs and strategies as Ted and the team are identifying. We think we will serve the market best if we pick a few that are clearly needed and that we can get into place right away. It doesn't mean we'll do other things, but having a menu of 50 different options for financing, one, we wouldn't design them well enough, and it would be confusing in the market. We want to try and send a signal, yes, we'll do more. Here's what we're doing first. And the second piece, which ultimately might be more important, we know that we can't, as the state and as the IBank and our colleagues in the state treasurer's office, we can't deploy all this money directly ourselves, particularly when you think about, you know, the scale of the projects, heat pumps and ZEB chargers, for example. We need to find partnerships on the ground, these implementation platforms, finance partner platforms that we can allocate capital to and through, that will then originate projects with the right social and environmental and local objectives embedded. And then collectively we can underwrite and de-risk in that way. So it's loans for loans. We don't think we will be well served or serving the community if we have a tight grip on all the capital. It needs to be to good quality underwriting. We need to move the markets. We need to embrace social equity, but we can't do that all from here in Sacramento. So that's the key message there is platform partnerships that exist we could leverage. Think about local utilities, community choice aggregators, folks who manage incentive dollars. It could be also managing loan dollars, or things we haven't thought of, you know, new concepts that you all may be harboring. We have a priority of February 9th for responses to this RFI. There's more info on what we're up to at that URL down at the bottom. But we're going to keep this open. You know, this isn't like one and done, and we'll keep this hopefully mechanism in place for market engagement and partnership development over time. But this is a good moment to influence the state's thinking, and would welcome any comments, questions now or subsequently through these channels. And thanks, Ted, for the chance to talk about it today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. Thanks for sharing this opportunity. Obviously, in our work engaging with this group and with our advisors, we would love to be in position of helping to aggregate input from local governments, from market participants, and bring that to IBank to help prioritize some of these strategies. So we're about to go to the group discussion Q&A section. Please, start to share your questions, share your thoughts. I've added a slide here, Dan, just to quickly note how IBank, for the purposes of the RFI, is defining zero-emission transportation. Obviously a focus on charging infrastructure, but note that it's not all light-duty vehicles. Micromobility is included, as well as a medium and heavy-duty, school buses, trucks, which I know are very relevant charging infrastructure for a lot of the participants in this observer group. And then just kind of a note on the types of financing strategies that might be considered, although it sounds like, Dan, you guys are pretty open book at this point in terms of the products you'd be doing. So I think with that, we can go to the next slide, Carolyn. And now it's time to open this up to the group. I would love to ask a couple of questions to kick this off, but please, everyone, use the hand raise function. A lot to talk about here. Questions for Paul, questions for Dan, comments for Dan on the RFI, as well as questions for us or suggestions for us about how we push our work forward in the next few months and pull together some interesting proposals. I would love to start, though, with a question which will be for Dan, but I think relates to what Paul was describing a little bit, which is, we've talked a lot here about sort of very community-centric investments in EV charging and mobility that include different kinds of modes, or in Paul's case are resilience focused, and I think very targeting specific sites, specific whether it's houses of worship or elsewhere. Are those considerations that IBank is or can take into account in crafting the products that it might offer here? Investment outside of just pure charging infrastructure?
So our sense is yes. I have to caveat it in that this is an active competition with US EPA. They have their notice of funding opportunity. It was rooted in a very small piece of the Inflation Reduction Act, literally 5 pages of legislative guidance out of the 750-page bill. And it's a $27 billion program. So there's a ton that still needs to be clarified. But they do make specific reference in the NOFO, notice of funding opportunity, and various Q&A documents that they're aware that there needs to be commitments to the adjacent infrastructure and, in fact, capacity building to originate projects. So there's an interesting opportunity to do aligned granting to folks who will help build the project pipeline. It has to be connected to project development, but that's the first part of the answer. And there is the opportunity to lend to specific needs like panel upgrades and maybe even up to the edge of the grid in a way that you start to implicate the utilities investment regime, as previous speaker was referencing, and the challenges associated with mobilizing enough capital in the near term. The utilities are overwhelmed. We could spend all the money in that category, and we don't think that's the direction EPA wants us to take. But there is flexibility in making sure that these resources are connected and utilized and optimized to some extent. So we'll be exploring that flexibility wherever we can.
Awesome. Thank you. And then before we go to the group, please start to raise your hands or throw questions in the chat. Paul, hearing sort of what the state is considering looking at from the IBank perspective, are there state-supported loan and financing products potentially flowing through community-based, through CDFIs or other organizations that would be most useful for the kind of programs that you're trying to implement?
There are, but generally it depends on the requirements of that bank. Depending on if it's a traditional, non-traditional, institutional bank, often they want to know, how are you going to pay me back? EV charging has been unproven to banks, even with the new debt facilities and products coming out, to show them that, hey, this is something that could be collateralized. This is a strong revenue model for us, because most of it is still projection based. And so sometimes that's the conundrum based on how much is you need to lend for lended for the project versus the requirements and who is the developer of the project. That's generally what we see in our case. Unless you bring in a large bank, often institutional banks need to see you to do a personal guarantee or put up your own collateral. So trying to find other ways, even SBA does that, to scale projects is interesting.
Got it. That's very informative, and I think it actually reaches the sort of the utilization support concept that we're talking about. If there's a way to help reduce that uncertainty for a period of time in revenue, that the importance of that is pretty key. Even if the
solution we think is, if we're able to get investment in more tools or manpower to help permits happen faster, we can get projects in the ground faster to show banks how we earn from charging. But you have this development gap that makes banks wonder, what the hell are you doing with my money? When are you going to make some money? So there is that situation where, back to the original case of the meeting, hopefully we can move things faster in that development and city planning department.
Got it. That's sort of backdoor financing that we're talking about.
Ted, if I could jump on that, because at the end of the day, this is a lending program, and EPA is clear they want this to be not a grant. This is to demonstrate capital market viability over time. But at the same time, we can't just wander and say, hey, we're a green bank, but we're going to act exactly like a commercial lender. Thank you very much. We need to find the edge of where the market is now and make strategic choices that are differentiated. And so at the level of financial product design, it could be a standard financing technique, which is deferment, right? We have a period of deferral before payments are required on the loan. The interest is capitalizing. It's still at expectation, but it doesn't put undue pressure at the project level when it's really a social and policy priority to drive demand. for this infrastructure at the same time that we're financing the supply of it. So that's exactly the set of design questions that we're wrestling with, and hopefully we can work together on.
Awesome, thank you. That's super helpful. Alex, I hope you're in Watsonville today.
I am, yeah. Hi, so I'm Alex with the city of Watsonville. And I guess I just wanted to point out, the big thing, the reason we have these discussions is because we're trying to address climate change. And I think we get lost in the weeds a bit because we think, oh, well, we all drive cars now, so let's just switch to electric cars. Everything's going to be cool. And I think that completely misses how destructive, inefficient, expensive, unsustainable cars are, whether they're powered by electricity or powered by gas. They're a terrible, terrible, terrible thing that we're stuck with. And so here we are talking about, oh, let's just get all these electric vehicle charges in place. And we've completely missed the entire concept. We have an opportunity here to do something different. And I think the IBank plays a role in this, and fund the things we need, not the things we think we need. And I look at our community, it's heavily car reliant. It's a disadvantaged community. Our residents can't buy electric cars. There are no electric cars out there right now that are affordable, available, practical for our residents. And that's a blanket statement. There's 55,000 people in our community. There's probably about 20 people who have purchased electric cars. But beyond those 20, it hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. And I think we're ignoring transit, we're ignoring e-bikes. So for example, if we had good transit, our residents could use an e-bike to get to the transit stop, go where they need to go. They could get around town by e-bike. And we're talking about a vehicle that costs, $1,000. It plugs into a regular outlet to recharge. And as much as I love what Paul's doing with his company, I think it's great. They don't need charges in the public. It's and the same thing with clean transit. So I just want to add some perspective here. Great conversation, great ideas. I love the financing discussion, but maybe it's the wrong discussion, and maybe Equitable should include all of the options that truly do make a difference.
Ted, if I could, certainly from our perspective, we're aligned with you that this needs to be the full set of mobility solutions, and we're not focused on light duty, single occupant ZEVs. We'll find something useful to do there if the market and society suggests, but the EPA program is open to micromobility. As Ted noted, we're focused heavily on fleet transformations that can include transit and municipal engagements, medium heavy duty pollution. That's really, I think, the most compelling opportunity for near-term significant impact and an equity as well as a greenhouse gas context. So we're open to it all, and I don't want to suggest otherwise.
And Alex, I would note I agree with everything you said. And I think that we are certainly in our approach and in our materials, flagging the importance of other modes, but also recognizing that we do have a very car dependent society, and the climate imperative, which is certainly our focus here at CLEE, cannot be a means by which anybody's mobility or access to economic opportunity is reduced. And so we need to make sure that we meet people where they are. And in that case, it's not trying to get people to buy EVs before they have the capital or the desire to do so. It's making sure the infrastructure is in place so that when they do get that next car, new or used, in 6 or 8 or 10 years, they're able to use it properly. Because if somebody is required to get a different kind of car in 2036 and they don't have a good place to charge it, then we as climate advocates have all failed. So that I think there's room for both there, but appreciate the input. And that's why also I think the importance of the mobility hub kind of model that integrates modes and gets people into the right kind of mode for them is so important. And how can we get funding and financing for that model and stack it up? Paul, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, as I agree with everyone on bigger picture and how we should look at how different community types use mobility. When you look at that bigger picture, Alex, when I said, imagine with me, a car can provide power for you and your family at night, right? That part. I think when you look at that scale of what's possible that come with EVs, it's new transmission distribution power lines, because often in some of these underserved communities, there's blackouts and brownouts. So there is a byproduct that comes when we upgrade what's happening in some of these areas due to an EV charger. Also, what is required for some of these projects that I'm sure some of you have experienced if you drive an EV, networks suck. How many of you been in a parking lot or somewhere, can't get Wi-Fi to work with an app or things of that nature? Networks will be upgraded. Telecom will have to improve communication. I'm sure there's so many byproducts, but what happens is now some of these community types, I feel, especially rural and underserved, are more connected because all these kids are on the apps. All these kids are using this. So because of the EV chargers, I think there's a trickle down effect by upgrading the infrastructure and prioritizing what's on the budget and the ledger now for spend, and seeing how we can use the entire Buffalo for micromobility and for scooters and for the betterment of, you know, how these folks can now have clean power, new power with microgrids and storage, and even using a car when power goes out or a fleet of city cars to provide temporary power at an emergency center. So I think there's levels to it other than just EVs.
Paul, thank you. So we're gonna have just a few more minutes here for group discussion or Q&A. If anybody, any of our fleet managers or local government folks has any questions or comments for Dan, as we said, we do want to make sure we're integrating this group's expertise into our response to the RFI. If anybody's thinking about those questions might be, I did want to ask Ilse just a quick question of you in the, in the Sacramento Mobility Hub context. We sort of think of it as a, EV charger placement strategy when we first were talking about it, but of course it's not. And, I think it's actually responsive to a lot of what Alex is raising there in terms of the different kinds of modes and opportunities that it brings together.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great way of talking about it. A lot of the community around the Del Paso Heights actually don't have vehicles. They don't have cars. And so that is something they realized as they were providing just chargers and to EV Zip cars, was the fact that oftentimes there wasn't anybody to drive. So they actually kind of came up with this plan share go method where, yes, you could get a vehicle yourself, or they could combine you with somebody who could drive and still providing you the option of getting from A to B with as low emissions as possible. And so I do think that community outreach is really needed. And Breathe California was really great at figuring out what was lacking from the hub that was making it not usable or not as a resource to the community. And so that's going to be really important. And then, of course, they connected with other parts of the community, the high school, Green Tech, which was, like I said, doing workforce development. And so then that electric shuttle came on board. And so in talking to your community and what you need, you can start developing these things that aren't just vehicle dependent, but just get them to where they need to go.
Awesome. Thanks, Ilse. And if we can find ways to make that model replicable and that coalition replicable throughout the state, I think that's going to be really, really important and valuable. And Dan, perhaps the IBank can be involved in supporting a slice of that. Awesome. Well, I think we're going to move to a bit of next steps and wrap up here. This has been a very fruitful discussion, and I think we have a lot of feedback for you, Dan, that we'll be pulling together, and also for our initiative. Carolyn, do you want to just go to our sort of next steps slide, and I can just flag a few things, and then we'll go on from there. So you can go to the next one. I think that'd be great. So, sorry, the prior one, I was ahead of you. So we are in the sort of the final third of our initiative here, and as we've flagged this before, we've been doing a sort of a research and outreach based initiative. We've been communicating with this group as well as our Paul and Dan and our other advisors on a regular basis in a more intimate setting, and we're developing now our sort of concrete set of 2 or 3, I think, key pilot kind of proposals that we're going to be trying to use to bring together local government partners and financial institutions and backers and EV and mobility developers. Those concepts and others are encapsulated in the white paper draft that we shared with all of you. We will share that again, and over the coming weeks and month and change, we would love any feedback that any of you have on the concepts that we're flagging, ways to refine them, places where they might be usable. If there's interest in engaging in a sort of a partnership and connecting with us and our advisors and some of the other groups that we're talking to, we'd love to hear that and see if that we can put together a coalition and get a good idea in front of the right people. And then, as I said, we will be putting together a short response to the IBank RFI, encapsulating a lot of the findings that we've had so far in this group. And if you have individual one-off thoughts that maybe you wouldn't want to put together your own letter for, but you'd like to channel them through us, we would love to include those. No attribution needed. Get those in front of Dan and his team so they can make the most informed decisions on how to invest in this kind of infrastructure and make sure that it is meeting the needs that Paul describes, the needs that Alex describes, you know, and meet sort of community needs, not just the existing vehicle market as we have it today, which is of course of key importance. So I think with that, I'll pass it back over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, so just moving forward, we have our next advisor meeting coming up soon. That's our group of experts in financing mechanisms, equity, mobility. And the next meeting coming up, we're going to be talking about private investment and financing approaches there. And then in our 5th meeting, talking about some community-based approaches and innovations. And then just how to stay involved in the project. We have our Equitable Mobility webpage. There's a lot of resources there and more information about the project. We have resources from our advisors, as well as a funding opportunities and resources page that we keep updated with new funding opportunities. And then you can also access the past meeting recordings and slides from there. I'll be sending out an email after this with the recording and slides, but if you want to access the first observer meeting, you can do so there, as well as some of the slides and notes from the past advisor meetings if you're interested in that. And then, as Ted was mentioning, we have our draft white paper. If you have your phone, we have some QR codes that'll lead you to download the white paper, and then we have a feedback form that we would encourage you to leave some feedback on any of those financing strategies that we went over and that are in the white paper. I'll also include that on my follow-up, so you should be seeing that from me. And then lastly, we just want to mention that we are planning on having an in-person meeting in the Bay Area in May. And so look out for more details about that as that's developed. I think with that, that is all we have. Our contact information is here. If you guys have any questions or comments, please do reach out to us. And thank you all for coming.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. And yes, any and all comments on the RFI or otherwise, please send them to us and we will pull together something to get it in front of Dan's team by the end of next week.